From the plate.
No, it's all good. I already muted everybody.
Good?
Yeah.
2 years ago, when we first moved there, like, starting 2 years ago. This year, she's going to do it.
Am I in your shop? Or it's going direct to you?
It's direct. Okay, we're ready? Let's go. Before I get into tonight's topic, a little background about my relationship with Avigdor Miller. I was fortunate to get to know him when I was a bacher, about 12 years old, in the Mir Yeshiva. You knew you were around greatness just by the sheer depth and breadth of his scholarship and his chachma. It was absolutely incredible. Then I had the privilege to know him most of my life, to the point where I had listened to every shir twice. And if he started a sentence, I could probably finish it. You know your Rebbe, you know how his mind thinks. But I never appreciated him that much until I moved to Miami Beach, when I used to teach as Kirister in Miami Beach. And then someone came to my house and saw a huge picture of me and him in my dining room. He was from Venezuela. He was part of a group of kivutza, of Balei Tshuva, that I came to know him only by reading his material. Suddenly the man was in shock when he saw the picture of me and the Rav, and he says, "You knew him? You actually spoke to him? You actually touched him?" I realized how much I didn't take advantage of him when I had him when he was alive. But he was brilliant. He knew Kol Torah Kula on his fingertips. He was so confident every Thursday night when he had shir, that after he finished the shir, he asked the audience, "Ask me any question you want on anything in the world." And he could answer it with ease. There was no subject that he could not handle and master. So, how did this shir come to be? Baruch Hashem, I've had this chus to give a shir here every Shabbos. And so, about 3-4 weeks ago, Rabbi YETZER and I were discussing, we need something that would be really impactful for Tisha B'Av. I didn't know where I was going to go with it, but there is a fantastic lending library in this town, in the basement of a major tzaddik named Dr. Robert Shanik. Okay, I'll tell you what happened. I took my 6-year-old daughter on the Erev Shabbos 3-4 weeks ago to just take some books out of the library. He has an amazing Sifriya library of Yiddish books. People streaming from all directions to come and borrow. So I was with my 6-year-old and we got some nice children's books for her. I decided to see what's doing in the other sections. When I saw the Sefer that I myself had not had the privilege to read, because when it was published, my daughter had gotten married and I just never got around to it. So 3 weeks ago, I plunged myself into this Sefer to try to understand it. And what I saw there in terms of Avigdor Miller's take on the Holocaust blew my mind away. What was so important about it is its primary edus. He was there. He was in Slobodka. He was in Germany. He saw it all. You can't fake him out. Many of us have grown up with sterile descriptions of the Holocaust based on newspapers or books that they gave us in schools. And you're going to see tonight how many lies we were fed, how much deception there was in a lot of this material. And so let's start by the first concept that I want to say. It's an error and mistake to consider that the history of Klal Yisrael is like the history of any other nation. No. It's not the way it works. Whatever happens to the Goyim is just a secondary effect to shape the history of the Jewish people. He used to tell us that if the river in China overflows, it's because it affects the Yidden in some way, somehow, in America or Israel. Everything that happens in this world is connected to our destiny. It would be proper when we consider that we're incapable of understanding Hashem's ways. When viewing history, and you see one half of Hashem's chosen people uprooted and wiped out, it's reckless to dismiss the matter as just some mikra, some happenstance. Hashem's conduct of history demands us to study what happened in an attempt to understand what happened here. Because he tells us in Tehillim, Hayotzer Yogoyim Halo Chiach, when Hashem gives nations teichecha, you're not going to wake up. He teaches us what's right and what's wrong. The facts are so apparent that the reason is obvious, that only those who are totally ignorant of the way of the world would assume a simple approach that World War II is just World War II. It's just another action or event of history of the world. That's not the case. We have to understand that the Gemara tells us in Kiddushin 40b, the minority of the righteous undergo the suffering because of the sinful majority. Now, let's get into the next topic. One of the strangest events in history. Germany had for 150 years been the most disciplined and civilized of nations. An Adel nation, very refined. The transformation of a nation of law and order into a nation of murderers is one of the strangest events in history. How do you understand a nation that was so civilized, that was supposedly so refined, became a bunch of murderers? It was indeed the hand of Hashem. So let's get into some history. On January 30th, 1933, the Nazi Party seizes power in Germany and begins to issue gezerah after gezerah against the Yidden. Jews are beaten, taken to concentration camps, killings took place. This was an incredible transformation in a country where it was never expected, in the heart of Europe, civilized Europe, and the Enlightenment. And what was going on here? All Jews were dismissed from government service. Imagine, like we have in the United States, hundreds of thousands of people working for the government. Suddenly, anybody working for the government is fired. That's a Jew. Forbidden to practice any profession. You're a doctor? Sorry, we're taking your license away. You're an architect? No longer. All Jews excluded from resort towns. You can't go and enjoy yourself in, who knows, upstate New York or any other resort town. The headlong race of German Jews into assimilation was born to halt. The Jews were running to join the Goyim. They wanted so much to be part of their society. No longer. In 1938, on November 9th, because to get revenge for the killing of a German officer in Paris by a Jew, one Jew who was so upset with what was happening to his parents, because his parents had emigrated to Poland, and there were 70,000 Polish Jews in Germany, and they were asked to leave. Decided to walk in to the German consulate in Paris and shot one of the lower level diplomats. As a result of that, synagogues were burned down throughout Germany. This is how Germany takes its nakama. 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps. Jewish shops were pillaged and wrecked. Jews were killed, and a fine of 1 billion marks was imposed on German Jews. The process of taking over German property was accelerated, and Jewish businesses were sold for nothing. Many Jews had already left the country after paying an exit tax that was 1/4 of their property. That means if you were worth 100,000, 25,000 to get out of Germany. Despite the collapse of the dream of German assimilation, which was that the dream of the Yidden there was to become part of German society and to forget forever that they were Jews. That's what they wanted. In 1941, 30,000 German Jews were put into hard labor. Even the purchase of food became restricted. That means if you were a Yid, there was only 1 hour, 2 hours in a day you could walk into a supermarket to buy food. Jews were entirely excluded from German schools, from barbershops. You couldn't sleep in the cars of the railways, waiting rooms. They could only shop at certain hours. They had no telephones. They were forbidden to use public telephones. Every Jew was required to have a special ID card and his passport and ration card before the word Jew. Means everything you did to try to run away from being Jewish, you were going to be reminded now. Every man and woman was required to adopt a Yiddish first name. Every Jew over 5 wore a star. The deportation of Jews to the killing centers was carried out with the cooperation of the Jewish community organizations under the Reformed Jewish rabbis. Which means the Reformed rabbis, who were directors, were only too happy to work with Hitler and give him all the Yidden. No problem. To help them slaughter the Jews. There were lessons without number. The prohibition of relations with Goyish women, which means Hashem was already sending them the warning. I'm not ready to destroy you. I'm even going to use Nazi legislation to try to stop you. But listen to what happens. German restaurants are no longer allowed to serve Jews. Lessons as these were intended for the benefits of Yidden. the sole reaction of the non-Jewish leaders in all free countries was, instead of waking up and doing tshuva, was to send nasty letters to the Nazi party, which only infuriated Hitler more. From Germany, the home of the Reformed Jewish movement, which annihilated and wiped out millions of Yidden, came the physical destruction of millions of Jews. For the first time in history, a government embarked on a policy of killing as many Jews as possible. This was the first time any government in the history of the world had an absolute policy to wipe out as many Jews as we can. This was the bitter wake-up call to German Jews, who surrendered their Jewishness to the German people because they trusted in the kindliness of the Germans. In the time of Haman, there had been a decree to destroy the Jews, but Hashem listened to his people's tefillos and avoided the decrees. Now, they didn't cry out to Hashem for help when this was going on in 1938, because most of the Jews listened to the new leaders. Therefore, from the same Berlin that poisoned the minds of Europe's Jews with the teachings of people like Mendelssohn, who was the beginner of the Reform movement, now came the destroyer. From the very source of where the problem started is where the problem destroyed them. Now the masses of Jews did not cry out to Hashem, and the terrible plan began to be realized. In 1939, in September, the Germans enter Poland, and there starts a campaign of destroying entire communities of Jews, men and women, in the worst way, seizing their businesses and their homes, crowding them together in extremely stamped ghettos, with orders of rape, torture, mass executions. Jews from all over Poland were sent to crowded ghettos where 7 people slept in a room. The method of transportation was also of destruction. They were packed standing in cattle cars. No food, no water. There were no bathroom facilities. The cars were sealed. They traveled for a number of days, and they were just standing. Many died in these transports. The typhus and other epidemics raged in the ghettos. No treatments were supplied. No Jews were permitted to reside outside the ghettos. Their property was left behind, and the Nazis could do whatever they wanted with it. Jews were seized as slaves with heavy labor, and even women were given jobs of men. No food was given, and the inmates were worked to death. Every day, large numbers died. In Warsaw, 5,000 Jews died per month. 1/5 of Polish Jewry died in the ghettos. The rest were murdered directly. They were collected in the marketplaces and shot down by the German soldiers. They assembled outside the towns where they were forced to dig large ditches into which they were crowded. Rav Miller writes, "My mother-in-law and her daughter were shot to death in a mass execution in Lithuania. Hitler ordered his shooting squads to travel from place to place in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Russia to destroy all Jews, in addition to the subsequent system of transporting them to the murder centers of the concentration camps." Who were the killers? Guess who? They were the German professionals, the people who were the elite, the distinguished, the refined people, educated, cultured Germans. Not criminals, not the lowlifes of German society. They were pastors, German Catholic pastors in the killing groups. These special groups moved with the soldiers in order to catch Jews before they could run away. Inspired by the lust of the Nazis, all other people became enthusiastic. Who joined the Nazis? The Romanians helped the Germans in Russia. They carried out huge massacres of their own. They killed 60,000 Jews in Odessa, where this whole Maskilim thing started, and I'll explain that later. Ukrainians got involved, Lithuanians, Russians. Everyone helped the part of the Nazis to kill as many Yidden as possible. The Jews were a peaceable and civilized society who still lived by moral principles, even if they weren't religious. They were surrounded by a sea of peasants from all these countries: Poles, Lithuanians, Russians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Slovakians. Many of these people carried knives, were addicted to drunkenness, were violent and cruel, and for centuries had been waiting for this opportunity to kill as many Jews as possible. The Jews now found themselves trapped between the German murderers and the vicious local population. They were faced with an unenviable choice. On one hand, could you escape from the ghetto where death waited for you? Or if you tried to escape, who was waiting outside? The local population, which hated you just as much as the Nazis. The Germans were successful in encouraging the local citizens of each country to make pogroms, and they egged them on. In Slobodka, Rav Miller writes, where I was in yeshiva, They killed 800 Jews in a single night. In Omestis, my wife's sister and her stepmother, with all the Jewish women and children of the town, were taken to a field nearby where they were all killed by shootings. The men were killed together in another location. This procedure was repeated in every town in Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. The incredible murder operation by the Germans just stupefies the mind and renders it unable to grasp how all this happened. The shooting of children in one orphanage would have shaken the world if it was a Christian orphanage in a Christian village. But now, thousands of Jewish towns and villages, hundreds of thousands of entire families, cities full of Jews were wiped out. And the world said, 6 million, nobody even cared. And the manner in which they died, the pressure of constant fear, the hatred on all sides, coming from the Austrians, the Poles, the Ukrainians, the Lithuanians, the Romanians, the Hungarians, the Slovakians, the loss of jobs, the loss of their property, the loss of their homes, disruption of families, the shock and night raids and arrests, seizure on the streets, murderous beatings, starvation, freezing, lice, forced labor that killed them, deportation trains, were torture chambers, death houses, epidemics in the ghettos, no medical aid, no supplies of food or clothing, 100-mile walks without food, with the sole purposes of just killing as many Yidden as possible, and then standing naked by a ditch where your relatives were already in the ground and you were the one waiting next, God forbid. The gas vans that packed victims were dumped dead on arrival. The murder chambers where the innocents were jammed naked and unspeakable tortures took place. 1800 years of Christian propaganda against the seed of Yaakov had finally borne its fruits. Rav Weissmandel, Zichrono Livracha, risked his life to appeal personally to the Vatican, to what's called the Papal Nuncio. This is one of the shluchim of the Pope. To save the children. At least, please, help us save the children. You know what he answered him? There's no such thing as innocent Jewish blood. All Jewish blood is guilty. This is the Papal Nuncio, the Pope's, second in command. The tyrants of the Middle Ages who hated the Jews in 700 or 800 years ago, they were considered benevolent and kind compared to what the Nazis did. And what happened? Before the Nazis, before all this happened in Europe, Hashem protected Klal Yisrael because they were loyal to His Torah. But when the Jews turned away from the Torah and began looking with admiration towards the Gentiles, looking up to the Gentiles, admiring the Goyim, Hashem caused the Gentiles to show their true colors. You want to see what a Gentile is? Now you're going to see what a Gentile is. You want to be like him? You want to just copy him? You love his lifestyle? Just wait, I'll show you their true colors. The thinking Jews could not fail to see the hand of Hashem in all this. There was no reason for this madness of hatred against the Jews. In the days of old, Klal Yisrael would recognize Hashem's hand that aimed to stimulate tshuva, because they would say to Hashem, our fathers trusted in you. They trusted in you and you rescued them. They cried out to you and you listened. But people like Sigmund Freud, who the world admired, who was a Yid that was completely not religious, couldn't understand what was going on. They were confused. This is obviously from the hand of Hashem. Despite the decrees and the hatred, the Jews who were assimilating, and they could see it with their eyes, persisted in their dreams to try to continue mingling with the beloved Germans. It was a impossible task to awaken the reformists. They were just too deep into desiring to be and live like Goyim. In every previous black hour of our history, the Yidden have responded to Tfilat HaKadosh Baruch Hu when there was a crisis. In Egypt, in Mitzrayim, Klal Yisrael cried out to Hashem. And it says in Shmos, you heard their cry at Yam Suf. Under the oppression of Aram, they cried out to Hashem. They cried out to Hashem against Midian. They cried out to Hashem when Ammon threatened them. They cried out to Hashem when Yerovam ben Nevat took 10 of the Shvatim into Galus. In every instance, Hashem rescued us from our enemies because they had emunah on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In every generations, they didn't have cried out to Hashem for salvation, for Yeshua. But now, this time, in the time of the Holocaust, the Jews did not. The majority of Jews didn't cry out to Hashem. The German reformers, Machshemam, had no God. There wasn't even a mention of Hashem in their Siddur. In Poland, the Yiddishists and the Zionists did not cry out because they didn't believe in Hashem. The newspapers of all these people despised the Talmei Chachamim. And Hashem had no place in their life. In Germany and the Western countries, the professional men whose ideology came from the Goyim and literature knew of no Hashem to help them. He wasn't in their life. They didn't grow up with Hashem. These are full blast 100% Yidden. In the capitals of all the free countries, the Jewish leaders of the welfare organizations didn't tell the Yidden to pray to Hashem. They didn't issue any call for tshuva like we have today, Baruch Hashem, from the Torah leaders of the yeshivas and our leaders. They saw nothing. It's all an accident. That's how they responded to what was going on during this time. It's all an accident. How clearly did the Nazis speak of Hashem's warnings? Listen to all the legislation that took place that forced the Jews to wake up, but they didn't get it. They didn't get the message. In 1933, the Nazis passed the law, the reestablishment of the professional civil service. Jews were prevented from working on Shabbos for the government. So even if you didn't want to keep Shabbos, you had to now keep Shabbos. Give me a second. People. So even if you don't want to keep Shabbos, the Nazis were going to force you to know what Shabbos was all about. Next, in April 25th, these are all Hashem's warnings. This just show you how Malei Rachamim HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. He sends messages. He doesn't want to destroy us. He doesn't want to punish us. He's trying to get the Jews to get the hint. In 1933, the Nazis passed a law called the Law Against Overcrowding of German Schools, preventing desecration of Shabbos, because now you couldn't go to school on Shabbos because there was no room. Again, another opportunity for you to wake up, go to shul, get the message, come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Next, in 1935, they passed the law for protection of German blood and honor, stopping intermarriage. So now, even if you want to marry the shiksa next door, you can't, because you're not allowed. All this to try to slow down the process so Hashem doesn't have to force his hand to punish Am Yisrael. And this is amazing. In 1937, they passed a law, compulsory Jewish names. That means that the Nazis were forcing you as a Yid to take on a Jewish name. When Germans were prohibited from patronizing Jewish doctors, this very proud group, the doctors, who were intelligentsia, also had the opportunity to start thinking. Now suddenly they lost half or 70 or 80% of their customers. Maybe Hashem's talking to me, but they don't get it. Jews were buried from the streets on Nazi holidays to let them know, you were Jews, and now you have to know who you really are. And you were, as a Yid, Jews were required to carry identification cards, and their passports were marked Jew. It became impossible to hide your Jewishness because the Nazis forced it on you. Every new decree was an additional message from Hashem to warn against assimilation. Again, numerous opportunities from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to wake them up. However, the vast majority of Jews have become so involved in assimilation that they didn't have an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their life. They learned nothing from these lessons. Every act of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has multiple purpose, including every miracle, everything that we see that takes place in life. The first and most fundamental of all purposes of things that happen in this world is to wake us up to think of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whatever happens, if Corona took place this year, you'd have to be an idiot not to come to think about Hashem, that He's pulling the strings here. Everything that takes place is to wake us up to realize that there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and He's running every detail, and He's trying to make mankind think. And the manner in which this catastrophe of the Holocaust took place, and all the hints, was to wake man up. the insane and entirely causeless hatred against Klal Yisrael was nothing less than divine madness, which is the title of the book that AVIGDOR Miller wrote. By the way, the material that I take from this book sat in his desk. He didn't publish it. It was published 12 years after he passed away, because the world was not ready for this. But this is what he called the Sefer, a divine madness, because what was taking place was surely divine madness. It was Hashem's open demonstration against assimilation. You want to join the Goyim, you're going to see my response. And the demonstration was so clear that only the most blind could ignore it. The decrees of Nazi Germany were aimed at separating Jews from Gentiles in every possible way. You want to join them? Mida kineged mida. You're going to see every action that takes place by the Nazis will force you away from them. The decrees of Nazi Germany were aimed at separating all Jews from Gentiles. There would be no social contact, no business contact, no contact in schools. You couldn't travel to the same hotels. You couldn't check in. No shopping. You can't go to Walmart if it's owned by Nazis. It's over. Right? There would be no personal identity. This was as clear a sign from Shemaim as possible. The badge on your levush to remind you, you're a Yid. The commandments of the Torah aim at separation. The mitzvahs in the Torah have one tafkid. Keep away from the Goyim. I'll prove it to you. In Vayikra it says, I separated you from the nations. In Shemos it says, V'atem tehiu machneches kohanim v'goy kadosh. You, the Jews, shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Every mitzvah in the Torah has one aim. Stay away from them. Bilam HaRasha, what did he say? Hem am levadad yishkon. They are a nation that's meant to dwell alone. Never before in the history of the world had there been so much Jewish assimilation with Goyim. And therefore, in order to stop it, came a hatred never seen in the history of the world for the Yidden. The Russians and Polish, the most powerful influence there was Karl Marx, which sought to erase every form of distinction between the Jews and the Gentiles. This was Marx's desire. We should all be the same. There should be any distinguishing between us and Goyim. This hatred against the Jews was especially remarkable in view of the tremendous disadvantages and losses by the Germans, which means that they were willing to lose the war in order to kill Jews. And you'll see how. Because they had such a lust to kill Yidden, they diverted very critical resources that they could have used to win battles. Instead, they were diverted to send the trains that they needed to transport their soldiers were rather given to the SS to transport Yidden. You'll see what I mean. Public opinion in foreign countries was affected by the murder of innocent Jews, but the Nazis didn't care. They diverted trains and workers which were working in their munitions factories that they could have used to continue to win the war. No, got to send them to kill them. The Germans bled themselves in order to kill as many Jews as possible. This was an open miracle of the most horrible kind, unequaled in hatred. The death trains were packed with Jewish scientists, doctors, industrialists, armies of free labor taken away from German factories. The Germans needed the Jews to work in the factories. It would have helped them win the war even. No, got to take them. They were rather closed factories which were being operated by the Jews, and kill them than keep them going, even if it would have helped the German war effort. Factories closed down, the trains were tied up because they were used for murder transports. And foreign public opinion was being alienated, but they didn't care. Yet the mad killing spree was first on the German agenda. We don't care. Win the war, that's priority number 2 or 3. Kill Jews was priority number 1, even if it cost us the war. This was madness. This was divine madness. Many Jews had lost sight of the immense superiority over the Jew over the nations. That means we walk around, we're supposed to walk around. I'm a Yid. I'm special. I'm something. No, they felt that they were lowlifes. Many had forgotten history. They started thinking that the Gentile was the role model, not me. It used to be a Yid felt like he was a Malach. Now, no, I have to copy Christian and Hans. Many believed that Western civilization was the answer to all problems. They had fallen into the error of admiring the manners of the masters of their land. When the Germans showed themselves to be the most efficient mass murderers, with their punctual schedule of extermination, every day, 20,000 have to be killed in every concentration camp. And they were very good at it, very scientific. And when the inhuman devils tortured their victims with all types of horrible suffering, the Jews learned a lesson of the highest value. The German scientists and doctors, who were so greatly admired by the assimilationist Jews, now revealed themselves to be demons. Shadim! Thousands of men, women, and children were tortured to death because we needed to have scientific experiments, the Germans said. And these medical specialists participated with heavy zerizas when they sterilized women, death injections, death chamber selections, draining Jewish victims of blood because they used Jewish, this I didn't know, they used Jewish blood for military war. They had blood banks for when German soldiers were injured, and the blood banks were from Jewish blood that was drained from these people who were in the concentration camps. 700 women lying in pools of their own blood. Their technical experts perfected the carbon monoxide death vans. You know, carbon monoxide. Stay in a room, pump out carbon monoxide, you're going to die. The cyanide death chambers, the crematoriums, the thousands of technical processes needed for the killing of millions. Many of the people who did this had university degrees. The science writers, the historians, the supposedly idle element of German society were employed in proving that the Jews were a low race with inherited criminal tendencies. In the process of shooting Jews to death in mass executions, lawyers, Christian pastors, school teachers participated. These are supposed to be the ones that are more sophisticated, more refined. In Russia and in the Baltic states too. The doctors, the army generals and their staff, all of these artists participated in the killing of Jews. The unreasonable worship of scientists and of the universities received a shattering jolt. It means the Jews used to worship the scientists, German scientists. The Sochashev, as they became the worst murderers in history. That means in the German killing units, the best ones for Germany were supposedly the most able ones. However, when the Jew begins to despise himself and he no longer understands his role as a member of a holy nation, then Hashem allows the scientists to reveal who they truly are. The trust in the outside world was also now revealed as unfounded. That means you trust in the Goyim, now you're going to see what it's all about. Despite the appeals for help, nobody came to the rescue of the Jews. They thought suddenly the world is going to come to our rescue. The Reform rabbis will help us. The Reform Jewish leaders of the wealthy Jewish organizations didn't help at all. As a matter of fact, they did everything they could possibly do to make sure that the Jews would die. Shiploads of refugees were denied entry to countries, forced to return back to Germany where death awaited them. From Berlin came forth the Reform movement, the Haskalah, and assimilation that destroyed Judaism in Europe. And from Berlin came forth the great catastrophe that destroyed the Jews. Their cherished homes and businesses were abandoned. And they were standing in sub-zero weather, mothers dressed naked or undressed. It was the most bitter pill that a human being can take, but it was the moment of great truth. This world may end in suffering and in death. The end purpose of man and his true existence in his career is to really work on Olam Haba. The 150 years since this began with this person called Moses Mendelssohn, who started this movement of Reform Judaism, had destroyed the Jewish masses. Many Yidden despised Judaism, poisoned by a hatred that could not be overcome by persuasion. That means if I could talk to the guy for an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, there is a God. He wasn't interested anymore. It was too deep. Like the Rambam writes in Yad HaChazakah, there comes a time when certain individuals are denied the ability to do tshuva. It's not happening. It was impossible to influence the children of the non-religious Jews to enter a Torah school, because the parties of these people, or nationalists, the Yiddishists, the Bundists, had become, their hearts were so hardened that they were all cut off from any hope of return to Yiddishkeit. And the survivors did not bring their parties to their free lands. Almost all these organizations which existed in Eastern Europe were wiped out. In the new lands of America and wherever that they emigrated to, South Africa, Argentina, etc., Mexico, only the Orthodox rebuilt life. Only the Frum. In America, the Telsha Yeshiva was reinstituted in Cleveland, Slobodka in Bnei Brak, Panovich Yeshiva, Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn, where I went, Yerushalayim, Satmar, Lubavitch, Babov, etc. All rebuilt. All Orthodox rebuilt. But none of the vestiges or any remnants in Sharim of all of these Buddhists and Yeshits and etc. They're wiped out forever. The disloyal Jews went lost among the Gentiles in the free lands. The Jews in the free countries had their own idols, but the European Haskalah had its poisonous effect. And Rabbi Yerucham Lubavitch, who was the mashgiach of the Mir in Europe, writes, this Gehenim, which was almost entirely forgotten from men's minds, was brought into this world for all to see. The terrible suffering, the fires of the crematoriums, the burning bodies, the screams of the dying, the hatred, the incredible hatred of the Germans, all gave a vivid portrayal of what Gehenim would be like in this world. Now let's find out what happened. Here comes the commentary from AVIGDOR Miller. Although many Yidden continued superficially to observe Torah in Europe, they already lost respect for all the rabbis, because they were being bombarded by the newspapers of the time to hate the rabbis, to hate Talmidei Chachamim. It's no wonder when the tide of immigration began in the 1880s to come to America, most of the immigrants just took their tefillin and dropped them over the boat. Not interested. Goodbye. Many of them threw their tefillin overboard from the ships. Even the maskilim did not dream. The people who started these problems in Europe never dreamed in a million lifetimes they would get as bad as it got. No one in his wildest dreams could have imagined that thousands of Jewish communities in Poland, Russia, all the Baltic countries, Hungary and Romania would be erased. Today, if you go, you can't even see them. Thousands of Jewish communities are gone off the map, totally disappeared. Where Jews once lived in densely populated villages and all Jewish towns today, nothing remains at all. Where there had been many tens of thousands of Bate Knisios, synagogues, and Bate Midrashim, nothing remains. About the only two that were left in the whole continent was the synagogue in Moscow and in Leningrad. That's it. From thousands upon thousands of shuls and Bate Midrashim. No one could have ever thought such a nightmare would ever take place. Even the ones who were most against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nobody was as devoted as the Jews were to the Torah. But you have to understand something. This is the way the YETZER works. The YETZER forsakes the Goyim, the nations of the world, and he attacks the Jews. He doesn't have to bother with the Gentiles because he owns them already. If the Gentiles continue to worship the Avodah Zarah, that's exactly what he wants. But the YETZER is very much interested in disturbing the Jews from learning Torah. That is why it happens when the Jews become wicked, they become truly Rishayim, really wicked. These maskilim had a poison, and they applied themselves to the job of spoiling the Jewish populations. No other nation had such people. The maskilim were succeeded by two major groups, the socialists and the nationalists or the Zionists. To some people in America later on, it was maybe a coming back of Judaism. They preached patriotism for the Jewish people, but with no connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They preached a new ideology as a substitute for the Torah. They said you can be the best kind of Yid if you have a country, and you don't need any Judaism. You don't even need a God. And they would write about it in all their newspapers. Rav Miller writes, a former yeshiva student related to me that he had been expelled from the Slobodka yeshiva in 1904. in Slobodka, one of the students got up with a gun and threatened the Rosh Yeshiva. He stood on a bima and started to preach socialism in the yeshiva. That's how it started corrupting all aspects of Yiddish society. In Malch, Rav Zalman Sender founded a yeshiva, a branch of Chaim. But a number of students fell into the trap of the Haskalah. And he was forced to leave. Rav Shimon Shkaf became rabbi of Malch, and he founded a yeshiva. Rav Shimon Shkaf was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. But in the following year, the leftist socialists captured a number of disciples and also converted them into socialists. The following is a description of what it was like in Galicia. And the Haskalah movement has already penetrated the large towns. No more were they wearing streimels and bekishes. Now they look like goyim. The children were sent to gymnasiums, which are public schools, and to universities. And let's find out what happened in Slutsk. This is where Von Kotler went to yeshiva. The youth began wearing long hair. The yeshivas were emptied out. The town became full of students. Little by little, the old way of life was pushed aside by the new way. There was no life inside Slutsk anymore. It collapsed when the Nazis came during World War II and wiped out the entire Jewish population. They merely completed the destruction that the Jewish communists had already started. Most of the work was done by Yidden to destroy the neshamas of the Yidden. Now here we come to a very great problem, Rav Miller writes, and that's the problem of sheker, lies. Lies that were told by textbooks, lies that were told by newspapers, by articles. There have been so many lies manufactured about the Jews of Yidden. The Jews of Europe, in their great majority, had already cast away the Torah. Don't listen to what anybody tells you. He says, I was there, I saw it with my eyes, Rav Miller writes. It doesn't mean that the frum ones weren't of high quality, but they were a very tiny minority. The frum Yidden in Europe were a very tiny minority. The vast majority of the Yidden listened to the atheist leaders who didn't believe in any Hashem or any God. They were violently against the Torah, and they were the leaders of the people. And the youth were followers of these people, so that they captured the minds of all the young Jews. A great mass of the Jewish people belonged to the Communist Party, leftist radicals. People were hostile to anything connected to Frumkeit or religion in any way. They were Marxists. They were rebellious against the Torah. The entire youth, with a small exception, all defected and left and were disloyal to the Torah. Now I have to understand something. Yevamos tells us in Meseches Yevamos, in Samech Gimel Amud Aleph, no evil or misfortune comes upon the world except because of Klal Yisrael. If there's let's call it an earthquake in San Francisco, it's because of the Jews. If there's a tidal wave or tsunami in Japan, it has something to do with the Jews. Whatever event takes place in this world is because of us. Rashi explains that Hashem brings a misfortune in order to wake up His people and to warn them. This tsunami should have been for you, Chas v'Shalom, but get the hint. I'm going to send it on the Chinese, but not you, so you can get the message. This earthquake in San Francisco could have been Chas v'Shalom Yerushalayim, but no, I don't want to do that to my people. I'm trying to wake you up. All history is manipulated by Hashem for the sake of the Jews. The Gemara tells us even the ships that travel from Gaul to Spain make money only because of the Jews. No Jews lived in Gaul, no Jews lived in Spain at the time. Yet all money made by these goyim was because of the chus of the Jews. So we have to study this. We have to find the link between what goes on in far lands and the people of Klal Yisrael. The Jewish nation is unlike any other nations of the world. It's a nation whose existence is only for the purpose of the Torah. That's it. That's why we're here. When Hashem tells us, "V'atem tiulim mamleches kohanim v'gor kadosh," you shall be to me as a kingdom of kohanim and holy nation. That means He's trying to tell us the message. I gave you the Torah. I created you to study the Torah, so you could praise me. In 1881, the period of pogroms began in Russia. Now that's an important date, Rav Miller writes. The pogroms caused a very big upheaval amongst Russian Jews. The group that was pressing for changes were the Maskilim. They wanted to become part of Russian society. Maskilim means those who seek education. Where did they get this name, Maskilim? The Maskilim had preached, forsake the Talmud, turn your back on the Gemara, and the Jews would become enlightened. You're dark. You're in the dark ages if you study Torah or Talmud. So they came up with this concept of maskilim. If you now forsake it, turn your back on the Torah, now you're really enlightened. That was their theme. Forsake the Talmud, and I'll make you enlightened. And once you're enlightened, you'll no longer be hated by the Goyim. They'll love you. That was the argument. If you Jews want equal rights, you must find favor in the eyes of the Gentiles. That's the only way to make it in life. And when the pogroms came, the maskilim who were anti-Torah were shocked. What happened to their svaras? That if we act like the Goyim, they'll be nice to us. Because when the pogromchiks came, they didn't care if you were a doctor or you were a water carrier. They killed both. It was a slow process. For more than 100 years, the maskilim had controlled the newspapers, preaching against the rabbis, portraying the rabbis as an arrogant group of people who had no interest in Klal Yisrael. The population read these newspapers and they were affected by them, and now they wanted nekama against Talmidei Chachamim. When the time came and there was pressure from the outside, the Jewish nation basically collapsed. Not only that, but a large number of Jews became active enemies. The Izvestia, which is the Jewish communists. And this happened in Hungary, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland. Hasidic centers, such as Munkac, where Torah Jewry once flourished. And the Rav writes, came to me today when he was alive, a man from Munkac, who told me he was born in Munkac, who couldn't read a siddur. That's how they wiped out all Hasidic areas. This is an area, this is a town that was as loyal to Hashem as possible. And he says, one day a man came to me, I said, can you read a siddur? I can't even read Hebrew. The job to destroy Yiddishkeit was done so effectively. Rather, the grudge against the Torah had been there already. That means that the problem just didn't start in the 30s. 30, 40 years before that, they started really attacking the Torah. How is this grudge able to take hold? Mishlei tells us, Shlomo HaMelech tells us, let loose the water, and that's the beginning of the quarrel. What does that mean? Chazal explained that when a man lets loose the waters of Torah, and he neglects to learn Torah, that's the beginning of judgment. How can it be that a loyal and observant nation like Klal Yisrael became such a low spiritual nation? Because of the neglect of Torah study. That's the bottom line that Rav Miller wants to teach us. If the study of the Torah had been